What is time? That fleeting little thing. A construct in the mind of all of us. How does it function? How does it move, waiting unseen through our lives like tears in the rain? What then can we make of it? We can measure it through seconds, minutes, hours, yet it always stays the same. That's what we're here to discuss today though. The essence of time and what it means for our games. Our like O-U-R, not like H-O-U-R. I understand that's probably a little bit confusing because we just did that whole little intro philosophical piece on time, but like, okay, come on, you get it. Hungrybox and LOD have played 5 sets against each other throughout 2022. Most notorious of these was their grand final sets at GigaSchwab 3. Of the 9 games played in this grand finals, which adhered to Melee's universal rule set with an 8-minute timer, 5 of them went to timeout, and the other 4 were damn near close to it. This set sparked a recent outcry among not just the Melee scene, but the greater Smash Bros. Community as a whole about our beloved timer. There were many conservative views that wanted to keep the timer at a strict 8 minutes, and there were just as many that wanted to adopt a change to the rule set, asking for less time on the clock per game. This raises the question, why even have a timer at all? To answer this, we need to look back on what may be the most infamous set in the history of Smash 64. Super Boomfan vs. Gerson at LR5 is perhaps the longest set in the history of competitive Smash across all titles in the franchise. Clocking in at a modest 1 hour and 54 minutes, this set provided the context to competitive Smash on why a timer is necessary. Super Boomfan was here to make a point. The combination of a massive stage like Hyrule Castle and a game with minimal defensive options and touch of death combos like Smash 64 was just begging for degenerate tactics. The timer itself serves the purpose of forcing interaction. Without the timer, you just end up having a Pikachu and a Kirby camping opposite sides of Hyrule Castle and refusing to interact with each other for over 25 minutes. Thanks to Super Boomfan, that's not even a hypothetical. How then do we impose a time limit on a match without having it directly affect gameplay in the majority of cases? Well, put enough time on the clock that players won't be tempted to camp until a timeout. There's even a number of players who go into a match with the intentions of camping, only to become bored and dissuaded by waiting an entire 8 minutes. Westballs vs. Armada at the Big House 4 is a prime example of this. Westballs goes into game 1, gains an early lead, and then camps the top platform to time Armada out. There's little to nothing Armada can do against this strategy, but when there's only around 3 minutes and 30 seconds remaining on the clock, Westballs can't seem to bring himself to finish what he started. He leaves his home on the top platform and begins to interact with his opponent. The set continues with the two interacting and playing in a way many would consider to be normal. So what was the point of wasting time in game 1 only to not even commit to the strategy? This just goes to show that even those at the top can't bring themselves to commit to a tactic deemed, for lack of a better word, lame by the community at large. However, it raises another question. Could Westballs have stuck to his camping game plan more thoroughly if there was just 6 minutes on the clock? In theory, yeah, but in practice, such hypotheticals still remain to be seen. This brings up another important question we must ask ourselves. Are timeouts even a bad thing? Across the broader FGC, timeouts are more or less commonplace, and when they happen, they're usually exciting, hype, and make for a great spectator experience. Timeouts in Street Fighter are hype. Timeouts in Tekken are hype. Timeouts in Strive? Hype. And yeah, although rare, even timeouts in Super Smash Bros. Generate hype. So what is it about timeouts in our specific game that make TOs and top players so opinionated yet wary to put theory into practice? It's a decades-old question with seemingly no answer in sight. These recent discussions regarding the timer in Melee are nothing new. Even as far back as Apex 2012, we were having lively debates on whether the timer should be diminished. The grand final set of this tournament is a perfect example of how even top players will play the timer to get the win and opt for a more arduous and patient approach to the game when their initial game plan didn't work. Melee historians will remember this either awesome or agonizing set as one of the many times Armada counterpicked young Link against Hungrybox and proceeded to projectile spam and camp the Jigglypuff player to ensure a victory. But what exactly did having 8 minutes on the clock afford either player in this matchup? If someone is really dead set on camping, wouldn't they camp regardless of the amount of time on the clock? Would it not then be better to lower the timer in order to boost spectator enjoyment, ensure the tournament runs efficiently, and to save players crucial mental stamina? This set leads directly to those and related questions, as unlike the Westball set we referenced earlier, Hungrybox and Armada are not deterred by numbers on a clock. In fact, over the 2 sets played, 4 games went to timeout, and most games lasted a minimum of 5 minutes regardless of which stage they played on. Sounds kinda like a set we talked about earlier between Hungrybox and LOD, doesn't it? History repeats itself. Now, you may be saying to yourself at this point, wow, this sounds horrible. What a nightmare. Who would want to watch this? But the VOD on YouTube has over 40,000 views, which is quite a lot for such an old set, and it's still collecting comments in the modern era, some as recent as 2021. No matter what the vocal minority of community members screaming about how lame and boring timeout matches may be, they clearly don't deter people from watching. On the topic of the views the Apex set gained, New York TO Ryobeat had a Twitter thread recently in which they discovered that despite the seemingly universal outcry against timeout matches, they still garner a huge number of views. The primary example was LOD vs Hbox at Genesis 8. Of the over 80 sets uploaded to YouTube, that set, the boring, campy, floaty matchup, currently sits as the number 12 most watched set of that tournament. Even the sets the community claims to hate are among the most watched. All of this circles back to a question that has been on multiple community members, players, and figureheads' minds for over a decade now. Why are we still running an 8-minute timer? A thread posted to Smashboards in August of 2012 asks literally this exact question: why is the timer 8 minutes? Is there an argument to be made that spectatorship should take priority over how players choose to interact? Would less time on the clock really lead to more timeouts? And if so, is that really such a bad thing? This thread goes on for pages and pages philosophizing over questions such as these, and in our modern era, without proper tournaments to look at for evidence of a shorter timer, all we can do is philosophize along with them. The discussion continues without anyone taking initiative to step up and test these theories in practice by running a bracket with less than 8 minutes on the clock. Now, if only there was a way to study this behavior by running a tournament with a shorter timer in place. Only one tournament stands out as adopting a shorter timer in recent memory, and that's Royal Flush from 2017, which had a, cue the confetti, 7-minute timer in its rule set. So, what exactly did this change? Were there more timeouts at this tournament than any other due to shaving a whole minute off the clock? Cue even more confetti? No, not at all. In fact, nothing substantial regarding the timer happened whatsoever. Even matchups with floatier characters that lend themselves to more patient play were unaffected by this. Hugs and Armada played a set of Samus vs Peach in Winners Round 2, one matchup that could lend itself to timeouts with the shorter clock. However, of the 3 games they played, none of them even passed the 5-minute mark. Now, they also played on Yoshi's Story and Battlefield, which are much smaller stages that force interaction, so perhaps if they had a game on Dreamland, we might see the clock come into play, but for this specific tournament, none of the matchups present seem to be affected whatsoever by shaving a minute off the timer. Some speculate on methods of changing the rules in the event of a timeout which don't require changing the timer, but these two have flaws. Ledge grab limits have become fairly popular as a new rule, but even outside of the issue of how a TO can track something like this in pools, this new rule seems to have unintended consequences. Punishing characters like Yoshi, who are a bit more vulnerable on the ledge than, say, Puff, while also doing nothing about the problem of fast fallers camping the top platforms. If Puff is the biggest problem, we could just simply make her lose any game in the event of a timeout. But this too is pretty biased and targets only a symptom of the problem rather than addressing the problem at the root. We could change the timer for specific matchups, as this is more fair than the past 2 suggestions, but then that becomes a bit of a TO nightmare also. We already have the .9 knockback ghouls floating around major tournaments, so it would be hard to imagine running larger tournaments with different timers for different matchups. However, rules have been implemented against specific characters using specific moves to stall, like Puff pounding or Peach repeatedly side-B'ing the wall, so it's feasible that more changes and variations of rules can be implemented, but in truth, the best rules to implement are the ones that are the easiest to track. It's pretty clear to see when a Peach is side-B'ing a wall to stall. You can just walk by and see it. It's not that easy to track that all proper matchup timers are being utilized in a pool. A final, strong hypothetical solution is that in the event of a timeout, in true King of the Hill fashion, we track who spent the most time closest to the center of the stage and award that person with victory. Like implementing ledge grab limits, this requires hard data to verify this for any game ran. However, there could be unintended consequences for floatier characters. Characters like Peach can take forever to recover, especially on stages such as Dreamland with no intent to stall. But Peach is also good at holding her ground in center stage. So long as the distance from 0-0 isn't being weighted, she should then prevail against someone who's camping top platform, assuming she hasn't spent too much time in recovery. As for the other official Smash games, Brawl, Smash 4, and Ultimate, the timer usually stays within the 6 to 7 minute range in the case of Smash 4, and the 7 to 8 minute range for Brawl and Ultimate depending on the region. Since Brawl and Smash 4 are generally seen as dormant games, not much debate on their timers, or even rule sets for that matter, still take place, nor were they particularly heated. The most spirited you were likely to find was something like this from Melee God Mewtwo King, discussing bringing Brawl's timer up to 9 minutes. Unlike Melee, there isn't a unanimously agreed upon rule set for Smash Ultimate, at least not yet. The discussions surrounding the timer for Ultimate are fairly tame. You either run 7 or 8 minutes and that's that. Unless you're a Sonic main, you're generally not going to be putting up much of a stink about the timer. Instead, rule set discussions revolve around what combinations of legal stages there should be to choose from, and whether those stages should have their hazards enabled or not. Even character bans tend to get more bandwidth than timer discussions. Despite all the discussions, arguments, and opinions on how long each Smash title's timer should be in the competitive rule set, nothing of substance will ever be known about how or if a shorter timer impacts camping and patient play unless we simply try it out, experiment, and pore over the evidence. When it comes to the community-wide discussion of if the timer should be limited, hypotheticals are tossed around as fact. But unless a tournament is willing to commit to shortening the timer, there's no way any of us will know for certain if high-level gameplay is impacted by less time on the clock. But what are your thoughts on the timer, not just in Melee, but across all Smash titles? Do you have any lukewarm to scalding takes on how we can completely overhaul our rule set? Who are we kidding? We know you do. Leave your ideas in the comments below, and subscribe to PGstats for more analytical content. This has been Turned Down for Walt. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.